Hi, my name's Natasha and I have autism. My friend Marcia asked me to make a video about my opinion on the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime as an autistic person. And so that's what I'm gonna do. Right at the start of the book, you start to get to know Christopher and a lot about his mannerisms. You get to know about the fact that he has very special interests. For Christopher, it was geography and mathematics, as well as space and sharks. For me, it's anything to do with video games, books, anime, and anything horror related or paranormal related. Those would be, I guess, my special interests, which I could literally talk on about for hours and hours and hours non-stop. You also get to learn about how Christopher has an inability to read people's faces. I used to struggle quite a lot with this, more when I was younger, but these days I'm quite good at noticing people's obvious emotional faces like happiness, sadness, anger, because those three things tend to be quite distinct. Like if someone's happy, they smile. If someone's sad, they might cry. When it's anything else than that, I probably tend to have to ask people what they're feeling because it can be quite hard and confusing to tell. When it comes to socializing, there are quite a few quotes in the book from Christopher that I can really resonate with, and one of those is, "I find people confusing. This is for two main reasons. The first main reason is that people do a lot of talking without using any words. The second reason is that people often talk using metaphors," which I personally couldn't agree anymore. I don't understand why people have such a hard time using their words instead of their facial expressions and their body languages. Using words may be harder, but I personally think it's a much simpler way to communicate with everybody understanding themselves, which is why I also love the quote, "Prime numbers are what is left when you have taken all the patterns away. I think prime numbers are like life. They are very logical, but you could never work out the rules, even if you spent all of your time thinking about them." I like this because I feel like autism is like prime numbers. Autism is what is left when you take away all the nonsense and the confusing patterns. Autism is what is left when it's purely ordered and logical. No more sarcasm, no more lies, no more hiding your feelings, no more confusion, no more social rules. It's all ordered and logical, and we all mean what we say and we say what we mean. And I really resonate with Christopher when he says, "Talking to strangers is not something I usually do. I do not like talking to strangers. I do not like strangers because I do not like people I have never met before. They are hard to understand. It is like being in France, and I hate it because if you went into a shop or a restaurant or a beach, you couldn't understand what anyone was saying, which was frightening." This quote describes me perfectly. I don't know why, but talking to strangers for the first time really does feel like I'm talking to someone with a different language. Depending on the type of conversation we're having, it can actually take me a little while to understand what the person is saying, and it also takes me a while for me to feel comfortable around them, which is why being autistic can be extremely lonely, because it's hard to make friends because friends first start off as strangers, and it's hard for me to approach and have conversations with strangers. Something that I really love that this book does is to show how imaginative Christopher is every time he visits space in his head, because people tend to believe or think or say that autistic people don't have imaginations or they have really bad imaginations, which I personally heavily disagree with, because we autistics, we live in our own world, and our worlds, the worlds that we build and create in our head, must come from imagination. And because we live there so often, it's always expanding and we're always creating different worlds that we just escape to when life gets too hard in our heads. And that takes a lot of imagination, it takes a lot of creativity. If you were to think of a person who has succeeded very well in life and who has made a lot of changes in history, and if you were to name them, I would be able to tell you and show you how those people are extremely imaginative autistic beings. Albert Einstein, Charles Darwin, the creator of Pokemon, Steve Jobs, Tim Burton, Beethoven, Vincent van Gogh. The internet itself was created by autistic people for autistic people, all of which required amazing minds and amazing imagination to complete and achieve everything that they have achieved. Speaking of imagination, something else that Christopher does, which I can highly relate to, is the way that he accesses the memories inside of his head. This is something I also do. It's kind of like a huge archive, and the best way for me to describe it is the scene in Sherlock Gnomes when he has found the 9 and he is instantly clicks that he's like, I've seen this 9 before, where have I seen it before? And then it skips to this like scene where it's in his head and he's searching around all the different rooms inside his head for the 9 that he has previously seen, and he's going through all the 9s he's ever seen in his life until he finally finds the 9 that he's looking for, and he's like, yes, this is the 9 I've been looking for. I knew I had it in my head somewhere. And that is literally what it is like to be in my head when I'm trying to remember something or access a memory. It is me just rummaging through all the archives, the files and the rooms just to find the memory that I know is stored in there. I will close my ears and close my eyes and just think really hard and just block out all the sounds, all the visuals, just to make it easier for me to go deep into my mind to remember things. People tend to find this extremely weird, but I don't care. This is it helps me think, and that is just how I work. I really love the way that Christopher's always making lists throughout the book. It just makes me really happy because I am obsessed with making lists, which I believe is an autistic thing. My entire life revolves around lists because lists are logical, they are useful, they are well organized. It's a great way to plan things, organize things, express things. So, taking Christopher's example, I made a list of my own. The way that Christopher reacts in both the memory that he has of going Christmas shopping with his mum, as well as the way he's reacting when he's at the train station, where everything seems to be too loud, too bright, and too chaotic, so he ends up getting really nervous and freaks out. This is because of something called sensory overload, where everything in your surrounding or your environment becomes too much and it becomes extremely hard to process everything. It can become extremely overwhelming. Personally, this happens to me quite often. I don't personally panic and have any breakdowns, but it still does happen. Sometimes I just end up getting really burnt out because it takes a lot of my energy and I end up just needing to go home and rest for a while. Sometimes I end up just feeling like I really need to cry, but most of the time I just cannot focus like at all, and I look really confused and distant. Imagine having big earphones in your ears and having a multitude of different sounds going off at the same time. And whilst that is happening, all these different sounds all in one go, and you're not able to focus on just one sound. While that is happening, in your face it's a bunch of different like people, animals, cars, flashing lights, the sky, the weather. Everything is just happening all at once, visually as well, and in your ears as well, all the different sounds, and you can't focus on one thing to look at and you can't focus on one thing to listen to. That can be really exhausting, and that is what happens when an autistic person is having sensory overload, which is why Christopher has a lot of breakdowns. All in all, this is probably not a good book for seeing or trying to understand how the mind of an autistic person works, because everybody is different, and also because unlike the book, we aren't constantly trying to define everything and to explain what everything means because we already know it. This is a work of fiction, so the author is trying to use the characters' internal monologue to express certain definitions and explanations of things that the reader may not understand. But this is not real life. If you want to understand what the brain of an autistic person is like, either ask an autistic person or read biographies of autistic people. However, saying this book is really good as like a beginner's guide to autistic traits and mannerisms, which is also really important to understand. There are so many things about Christopher that I love, but I know that other people find very strange and unusual. And it's funny because when I first read this book, it was in high school and no one could relate to Christopher and they all thought he was very strange. In fact, the girl sitting right next to me on the table blurted out that she thought Christopher was extremely weird and she's never seen or heard of anybody that acts like he does. And so the teacher had to explain to the class what autism was and why he was acting the way that he was. And I ended up raising my hand and being like, yeah, I'm autistic. And people were like, wait, what? And the girl next to me didn't even believe me. But the fact that nobody else was able to relate to Christopher at all was really funny to me, because in the book, Christopher is the only person that I relate to. I'm quite happy that a book like this exists because it's about a person like me. There aren't many books out there about people like me. And to me, everything that Christopher does absolutely makes sense. And I can see where he's coming from. And I absolutely relate to the majority of the things that he does. That is what I think about this book. And that is how autism affects me.